It is a great honor and a privilege on the day before Halloween to interview Dentistry's greatest CPA, Tim Lott. How are you doing, Tim?
I'm doing just dandy. How are you, Howard?
I love your teeth. I think some of them might need a little bit of bonding, veneers, some braces maybe. Happy Halloween to you, brother.
Happy Halloween. This is the Halloween version, isn't it? It's going to be scary.
Hey, I just want to start this podcast telling the listeners that if you would have bought instead of going to dental school for 8 years and you would have just bought a franchise, whether it be, and it didn't have to be a big one like McDonald's or Burger King or Wendy's, but it could be a little Subway sandwich or a Long John Silver's or any franchise, you would have a franchisee that would keep you completely on top of all your metrics. And you would know your cost, your labor costs. You'd have a management information system that's bulletproof. But that's not what we get in dentistry. Our franchisee is a nonprofit American Dental Association. And if you read their journal, it has everything to do with fluorosis and a rat's femur. Nothing to do with profit, loss, profitability, all that stuff. And Tim, I really respect what you've done on Dental Town for over a decade. I mean, you have 10,000 posts. You created a great online CE course on practice transitions. But I mean, every single time somebody asks financial accounting and managerial accounting, you've always been there sharing and answering. And it's an honor to be with you today. And I also want to say something that, can you unplug that printer? 100 years ago, physicians treated the whole body. And then over the years, they specialized. And now I think MDs have 58 specialties, and just the mouth dentist has 9 specialties. And you were one of the earliest pioneers, starting 30 years ago, pioneering a specialized accounting firm for just dentistry. And now not only are 95% of your clients dentists, but you're part of the IND-CPA, the Institute of Dental CPAs. And I want to tell you that you can read other dentist posts on Dental Town, and I'm out there lecturing. I'm out there a lot, and dentists walk up to me, and it seems like everybody that says that they went with a specialized accounting firm that only did dentistry, they finally got the big picture, and their overhead immediately jumped an easy 5% just by finally seeing what's going on. Mm-hmm. And I want you to talk about that. Tell me, what was your insight 30 years ago to start focusing on one vertical instead of trying to be something to everybody?
Well, actually, and it wasn't me 30 years ago, it was actually Paul Naden, the founder of the firm back in the 60s, that started working with dentists and physicians. And it just so happened that while I was in school, working at Hardee's, a burger joint out here on the East Coast, I started doing internship here at Naden. So I kind of fell into it. And when I joined, the majority of their clients were physicians and dentists. And then what happened in the early to mid 90s, there was a lot of consolidation on the physician side, on the medical side. Hospitals started buying up primary care practices, OBGYN. And so, if my client base back in the 80s and 90s was 50-50, within 10 years to the maybe mid 2000s, it's really become all dental at this point. And we made a concerted effort in the mid to late 90s to really say, hey, let's just focus on the dental clients.
And now you have 25 or 30 firms spread out all across the United States?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, and that is just amazing. And the other thing is, dentists, when you go to dental school for 4 years and you're applying, trying to get into dental school, you know you're with some wickedly smart people. And I think that a lot of dentists don't listen to their CPA because the CPA only has 1 or 2 dentist clients. And as soon as he gets off the phone with you, he's talking to a corn farmer, dairy farmer, restaurant guy, dry cleaner. But when those dentists, I mean, you guys consolidate data from hundreds and thousands of dentists all around. And when those guys see it, the way you guys present it, they get it.
Right. I mean, one of the things that I think any dental CPA can bring to the picture is the ability to answer the common question that every one of our dental client asks. And, that is, how am I doing compared to your other clients? And, back in the 80s, if we were doing 15, 20 industries, it would be hard if we only had one dental client to be able to answer that question. But now we can tell them.
Oh yeah, it's amazing what you guys do, and yeah, you're a pioneer, and you went to CPA school in Baltimore, which is the city of the first dental school and the dental museum. So lots of things in dentistry
Right.
starting in Baltimore. So I got the whole hour with you, Tim. You know, this dentist didn't get any training in accounting, financial accounting, managerial accounting. You know, they can't tell the difference between a statement of income, a statement of cash flow, or a balance sheet. Educate my viewers on what do they need to know about accounting. When a new dentist calls you up, where are they at as far as their accounting understanding, and where do you try to take them, and what are the most common questions and pitfalls? Share with us your 30 years of experience in this.
Well, it's interesting. First of all, when some of these dentists come to us, they're associates. So, at that point, there's very little quote unquote accounting that we really have to get involved with them on. It's only when they get into their practices or we pick up somebody that has gotten into a practice, whether they started it from scratch or whether they purchased it, that we really have to get into some of the basics on the accounting and bookkeeping side, which is really where it starts. And a lot of times what we find ourselves doing is educating them on really some of the foundation issues of bookkeeping that lead to accounting, that then lead to management reports and everything else.
Dentistry doesn't even have a standardized chart of accounts. When you talk about dentists talking about overhead, I mean, they're all comparing apples to oranges. First of all, they don't know their numbers. Any dentist who's ever told me their numbers, and then I had the opportunity to look at it, what they told me and what I saw were like, a parallel universe. And number two, I mean, when you walk out of dental school, you don't even have a chart of accounts. Like some dentists say, my labor is 20%, but he doesn't count health benefits or uniforms and then the next dentist says, well, I have high labor, mine's 26%, but then that guy's counting every single thing that the labor cost.
Well, and I got to tell you though, over the last 9 years since I've been participating in Dentaltown, I think that's actually come a long way and improved because even some of the newer clients that we get, I'm starting to see more of them with a chart of accounts that has these very dental specific categories. So yeah, I would say 10 plus years ago, they weren't very standard, weren't very common, but because of the CPA associations that are out there educating their clients, not just our association, but some of the others, I think that's actually improving. And Dentaltown makes it possible for us or some of the other dental CPAs that post, like Mike Bark, Sam Martin, to post their chart of accounts and post some of their knowledge. So it's really come a long way.
So where would you begin this education process of it? Why does a dentist call you up first, and what do you have to teach them first? What are the basics that you have to teach this person?
So I think we're talking about somebody that's just starting into practice themselves, whether they are starting it or whether they just purchased it. But I think initially, like I said, I think our first task is to really educate them, to get them organized on the bookkeeping portion of what they're doing. And that's just the basic, the money coming in, the expenses going out. How do you categorize those? What gets coded as a dental supply, what gets coded as a lab? And we spend some time educating them on how to properly handle those functions so that they can generate their own reports. They don't even need us to get involved to generate these reports. We're basically teaching them how to fish.
Okay. So what do you want to teach them?
Well, again, we're trying to teach them some of the basics of the overhead, what constitutes overhead, how they can manage their overhead, when they're able to generate their own reports. What are those reports saying? How do you read those reports? If they need to drill down in those reports, how do they do that? But we're just trying to help them manage their finances, whether it's business or personal.
Why does first of all, let's go with overhead. What is attainable overhead, and how different is it across this vast country we call the United States? it's tough on the. It's tough when people talk about the United States, because when you're in Europe, no one compares Germany to Greece or Finland to Norway, but in the United States, how do you compare overhead from downtown Manhattan and downtown San Francisco to Colwich, Kansas? And how does that play into effect in your mind?
It's interesting that's been debated on Dental Town in a number of posts. In my opinion, I think the best way that we as a dental CPA firm can measure or at least report some of these benchmarks and statistics is using the gross production factor. And I say that because you mentioned New York City as opposed to, maybe a farm in Iowa or something like that. A lot of their expenses are based on the cost of living where they're at across the country. And their fees along the same line are going to be, used based on the locations that they're at as well. The dilemma that we actually run into quite a bit is when we're analyzing a client's practice and a client's overhead, and they tell us, hey, Tim, my overhead is at 70%. And they're basing it on collections, and they're 90% PPO practice. So they're already writing off 35, 40%, but they're using collections to say that their overhead is 70% and it's too high. So we come in and say, hey, look, but based on your production, on your usual and customary fees, which we assume are reasonable, your overhead's 55%, right where it ought to be. So it's not that your overhead's high. It may be because you got the wrong mix of payers.
And what percent, I don't know, sometimes the dentists, are dreaming about a unicorn at night, but is a completely insurance-free practice, what percent of the market is an insurance-free practice of the 150,000 dentists in this big country? How many of your clients are?
That's right. That's how I was going to answer it. I bet only about 5, maybe at most 10, but probably about 5% of our clients are truly what I would define as fee for service, which is they may accept PPO patients, but they're out of network, and the patient's got to pay the balance. So truly fee for service, maybe 5%.
And do you see that as a good strategy?
I think it depends on the area. I know here in Maryland, there are certain areas near Annapolis, on the Eastern Shore, near Easton, where I think it can be a wonderful strategy because you have residents in those areas that can afford to pay fee-for-service fees. So I think it really depends on the area, and the area is going to dictate many times whether you accept PPOs or not.
So what do you think? So you're saying then in the rural that the overhead is lower, but the fees are lower. Mm-hmm. And in the big cities, the overhead is higher, but the fees are higher. So, right. So you don't think urban rural is that big of a variance in overhead? But what do you think overhead should be? Do you think it should be? It could be 55% of production.
Well, again, I can tell you that yes, it typically runs about 50 to 55% of production, or 55 to 60% of collections or adjusted production, and that's with the average write-off adjustments of about 19%.
So when the average doctor participates in insurance, they're basically writing off about 19%. Correct. Which I like to think of insurance as I package it in my mind totally different, because if a dentist will badmouth insurance, but if I approach them a question and call it a volume discount, I mean, if you're out there paying $300 for a new patient on Yellow Pages, or in my case, $300 a head on Yellow Pages, $200 a head on direct mail, $100 a head on a Google ad. But if I sign up for an insurance company and they deliver me 200 patients, I mean, I think most stores would say, okay, one Barbie doll costs $10, but if you order 300, I'm only gonna pay $8 a piece or $7.50 a piece. So basically, in my mind, what you're saying is you're giving up 19% to get a volume discount of all these patients, and also what I've been saying to dentists for years that they don't blink at signing up for a PPO where all the fees are 19% cheaper. But then when you ask them, well, why don't you spend 3 to 5% of collections on marketing because half of this country doesn't even have insurance, and they never want to spend any money on marketing, but they're the first persons to sign up and give a 19% discount to a PPO. So, So
and
what do you, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, and the fee-for-service practices that we have, you'll see their marketing in the 5 to 10% range. So
up to 10?
Yes, 5 to 10%.
Wow.
I've seen some even higher than that are doing, cable commercials, TV commercials, things like that, marketing at minor league ballparks here in Maryland. And that's comparable, as you just indicated, to writing off 19% if you're going to join a PPO. However, sometimes, again, sometimes it's driven by where the practice is. And if you're in an area that is, has a lot of employers that offer PPO insurance, it's going to be very difficult in those areas to establish a fee-for-service practice. And even if you are able to do that, it's going to take a long time. You really have to set yourself apart and, basically do something completely different than every other practice out there.
So in your view of all your clients, do you think the people who spend more money as a percent of sales on marketing actually net income higher than the people who do not spend a lot of money on marketing? I mean, what trends have you seen? I mean, do the people who spend, like for instance, I'll give you a stat. McDonald's spends about $600 million a year on advertising, and Burger King is $80 million a year. Mm-hmm. And McDonald's is number one, and Burger King is not.
Right.
So, what truisms like that do you see in your clients?
Well, I think you can certainly go back, and I suppose if we were to look at each of our practices that happen to be fee-for-service or even majority fee-for-service, they don't have to be 100%. They can be 80-20 mix. But if you were to go back and look at those, as I'm thinking about some of my own clients that I know are fee-for-service, certainly the ones that are doing the right marketing and they're willing to spend the dollars on the right marketing, they are successful practices. They are completely successful practices.
And can you define what right marketing is?
Social media. I mean, the stuff that's going to bring in the patients today. It's not the kind of stuff from 10 to 15 years ago, the yellow pages and things like that. That's just not going to work. We still see practices that come to us that are still paying for yellow page ads. And one of the first things that we do is say, look, you got Facebook, you got Twitter, you got your website. There's so many other marketing outlets that are trending today that they have to get on the bandwagon with because that's what everybody else is doing.
And another thing, when you're talking to dentists, they almost never have the data. In fact, I had one of the biggest lawyers out here have lunch with me, and he said, you're successful in dentistry. I want to pick your brain for law, but he has the same phone number on his yellow page ad, his billboards, his TVs, his signs, everything. So he can tell you where any of the incoming calls were coming from. Whereas I have my phone is bundled with my internet and cable TV. So I have 8 incoming lines. So I have a different number for the monument sign by my front door versus yellow page versus the desktop PC versus the mobile. I have 8 different phone numbers. So, I can sit there and do the math on that. And then you figure out if you're paying $300 a head on this medium and $75 a head on this one, then you move money over to this column. But tracking is everything. So let's chase down this overhead. So you said it could be 50 to 55% of gross production, 55 to 60% of 55 to 60% of gross production, and 50 to 55% of net adjusted or net collection.
Backwards, 50 to 55 on gross, 55 to 60 on adjusted / collections.
Okay. So let's go through there. Let's go down to the top category. So the highest category would be labor. Talk about labor overhead. What ranges? What do you see?
Labor overhead, here are the statistics that we came up with the last time we did a survey. Assistant wages typically run 6 to 9%. And now this is going to be based on adjusted production now. And again, adjusted production means we're using the average of 19% write-off. But assistants are 6 to 9%. Hygiene, 8 to 10%.
8 to 10?
8 to 10.
Okay.
Front desk, 5 to 8%. And if you have, larger practices with multiple doctors, with administrative people, that can get upwards up to 12, 13, 14% on top, or in addition to the 5 to 8. So about 12 to 15 total with administrative people.
Okay, so for non-dentists, assistants, hygienists, front desk, what would that total be?
For your typical solo practice, wages alone are probably going to run somewhere between 24 to 26%.
And for group practice, labor is going to be?
That's an interesting question. I would say for those three same categories, assistants, hygiene, front desk, that percentage could actually drop a little bit. But what they have are the higher end administrative people, the practice administrator, things like that. So again, you're going to easily add another, 5 to 7% on top of those three other categories.
And then what? And then what would the dentist be making?
Again, solo practitioners, we see somewhere in the neighborhood, again, based on the adjusted production or collections, in that 40 to 45% range.
The dentist would be making 45%?
40 to 45% of total practice revenues.
Okay, of total practice overhead.
Correct.
But of adjusted collections, what would that be?
Well, again, that's 40 to 45% of collections. That's what they would be taking home.
Okay, and in group, what would that be?
Again, it can really run the gamut because it depends on the type of group. But generally speaking, I would say the owners of a group practice, 2, 3, maybe 4 partners, should be taking home in the range of closer to 50%, maybe more.
Okay. So then when you look at an industry where the dentists are making 40 to 45% on solo, half a group, and then the staff's making basically another quarter, 25%, that's 3/4 people. Three-fourths services.
Yep.
So then when I look at the I don't like to call it corporate dentistry because what percent of solo practicing dentists are incorporated, would you say?
80%.
Yeah, so when people say corporate dentistry is all this evil stuff, they don't even realize, well, dude, you're a corporate dentist, you're an LLC. I mean, you're an INC. But I like to think of chains, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but a solo practitioner doesn't have the scales of economy for like a marketing director, or an HR person, all that stuff. But when I see, and I've seen this in pretty much, 50 different towns where if a dental office gets to a group practice with maybe even 2 or 3 locations, they get a little extra scales of economy, and they can get a full-time comptroller and a HR and a marketing person, and they seem to be more sophisticated and just do a great job. I see advantage of that.
Right.
But when I see these chain dentistry with 500 locations, I don't now you have another layer of corporate.
Mm-hmm.
So I understand how a corporate office can be more efficient for 3 or 4 dentists instead of 1, or 3 or 4 locations instead of 1. But then when you throw in like another national office and they got 100 bodies there, I don't see those 100 bodies doing anything so brilliantly efficient that makes everybody run smoother where they pay for themselves. I just basically see at the end, okay, now one guy has several jets and you, the dentist, just make a lot less money.
Right.
Do you see those coast to coast chain dental offices doing something so managerially awesome that everybody wins in the long, or they're just moving money from dentist to a corporate owner?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough for me to comment on the finances of the corporate offices. And when somebody asks me what a corporate office is, I basically define it as a dental practice owner where guys like Tim Lott own the practices, and I'm not a dentist. So it's all the investors. But see, I've never really been involved with any of their finances, their statements, their accounting. I've had clients that have sold to the corporate offices and have continued to work there. And the one thing that comes out of their mouths when they tell me what some of the changes have been, primary thing is the ability to save a little bit of money on purchasing, whether it's supplies, lab, services like accounting, bookkeeping, payroll, benefits for the employees. They get discounts on those. So typically, there's some savings in overhead because of what you alluded to earlier, the ability to go out and I'll pay $10 for this one, but if you sell me 100, then I'll only pay 7 or 8 each.
But what percent of overhead is labor and lab and supplies? Would you say for solo and group? Like what should a solo practicing dentist be paying for supplies, and what would they be paying for lab, and how affected it? Go ahead.
4 to 7% for dental supplies, and about 5 to 8% for lab. And then just let me give you a caveat there that, again, as more practices are using CRAC machines, CAD cams, what have you, that 5 to 8% is dropping, but the supply 4 to 7% number is starting to increase because of the blocks and such.
Because of the what? The blocks?
Because of the blocks, yeah.
Now there's a classic example, because I put the blocks in my accounting as part of lab. Mm-hmm. Because it's just for the crown.
Right.
And so that's a problem in dentistry where a lot of people aren't talking apples to apples. But, I understand corporate dentistry for the Walgreens, because the pharmacist, 80% of their cost was in buying the pills. So a group purchasing for the pharmacist was everything, and that's why they all folded into Walgreens and CVC. But in dentistry, where your actual supplies are 4 to 7%, dentistry is a game of labor. You want to maximize labor efficiency and productivity. It's not about gauze and anesthetic and carpules of composite amalgam.
Right, and I would take that a step further and say that if it's also about utilizing what you invested in. So what I mean by that, and you see this a lot on Dental Town in some of the lean and mean threads and things like that. But if somebody's going to invest $400,000, $500,000 in an office and it has 4 to 6 ops, and if they only work 4 days a week, 32 hours a week, then you have all this investment sitting there idle. And if they can somehow partner or utilize that equipment by allowing specialists to come in, that's just another way to, on a percentage basis, lower the overhead.
Yeah, so there's 168 hours in a week. And when you're open 32 hours, that's only 19% of 168. So their office is closed 4 out of 5 hours. And they don't have any digital recording of their incoming calls. So when they close down at 5 o'clock on Thursday and open up 8 o'clock on Monday, they can't tell you if they had 1 incoming call, 10 incoming calls, or 50. And all they'll do is they'll point to some audio cassette on a to leave a message, and they say they got 3 messages. And it's like they don't know. And then you go back there and change everything, and then when they come back and realize, man, we had 40 incoming calls over the weekend, and 20 of them have never called their patient, and you could hire a dentist graduate all day long for $85,000 a year, and they never think twice about hiring an associate and having that thing open, extended hours, but they're the first ones to complain if Heartland offers them a job, or Aspen, or Pacific Dental Services. And it's like, well, at least those guys are creating jobs. You're not creating jobs, and you're not answering your phone, and people are just, getting a recording.
Right.
Yeah. So, okay. So go ahead.
I was going to say, how many days a week is your practice open?
Well, when I was young and hungry, it was open Monday through Saturday, 7 to 7. But now I'm old and fat, and I'm 52, and all 4 of my kids are out of the house. So now I'm Monday through Thursday. We open at 7 and close at 6, Monday through Thursday. And then we're open Fridays 7 to 1. But we man the phones on Saturday. So we answer the phones and catch the fish on Saturdays. But not open.
And here's why I asked that question. I have a very successful dental practice here in Maryland. They're open 7 days a week. They're now owned by 3 dentists, but they have probably 3 other general dentists. They have 2 orthodontists, the oral surgeon, the endodontist. and they're open 7 days a week. Now, on Saturdays, I think they're only open from like 8 to maybe 4, and on Sundays from like 9 to 2. But the owners probably only work 3.5 days a week, and they work the schedule so people work different shifts, different weeks, and it's worked very well for them in this area where there's a good demand for Saturday and Sunday appointment times, especially with kids in ortho.
And you know what? How we were so amazing to staff our Saturday is people don't realize that you need to graduate 3 registered nurses to have one of them working full time in America, because 2 out of 3 RNs and 2 out of 3 hygienists on any given day are home with kids or their spouses work, whatever. And when we opened up Saturday, we for 20 years, it was completely staffed with hygienists and assistants who only worked that day. Mm-hmm. And they were home raising kids, and they loved that day because they said if they stayed home Saturday, their husband would just park in front of the television and watch college football all day and wouldn't interact with the kid. But when she went to work that day, she got out of the house. She had a life. But what she loved the most is her husband had to do what she does 5 days a week. And every one of them just loved the fact that they knew they would come home at 4 or 5 in the afternoon, and their husband would be completely exhausted and say, going to work is twice as easy as running around and feeding and diapers and all that kind of stuff like that. Right. So we talked about labor. The dentist is the highest overhead, 40 to 45%. The staff's 24 to 26%. Labs 5 to 8. Supplies 4 to 7. What would be next?
Well, you got rent and the facility expense that could run anywhere from 4 to 7%. You mentioned New York City earlier. We've seen rent expense in high rent districts like that up to 10%. So that can eat up, up to 1/10 of someone's overhead.
And what do you say to these dentists who you never know if, it's a social animal hardwired to be territorial. I mean, you let your dog out in the front yard and it goes and pees on this corner and pees on that corner. A lot of dentists just want to own their own land and building. Is that a territorial instinct thing, or is that a good financial business decision?
I think it comes down to being an investment decision. And it's a very common question when we get the buyers out there that are looking to buy dental practices where the seller also owns the real estate. And, if it's in a good location, if it's, a good piece of real estate, not a lot of problems with it, and if it looks like it's going to be a good investment, by all means, they should try to acquire the real estate. And if it can't happen at the same time they purchase the practice, my advice to them is, look, buy the practice first. Get a first right of refusal on the real estate. Get an option to buy it when you're ready to buy it. The practice is what's going to put food on the table. The real estate is an investment. You can invest in that today, a year from today, 2 years from today, when you're ready. But get yourself in the practice, get it running on all 8 cylinders, and when that is running the way you want it to run, then you can focus on acquiring the real estate if you can't buy it initially. So again, I think it depends on the investment opportunity, whether it makes sense to buy the real estate in addition to the practice.
Okay, Tim, when a dentist comes to you and they have high overhead, mm-hmm. Why do they generally have high overhead, and what is the common reoccurring theme in coaching someone down from 75% overhead to a more reasonable overhead? What do you think the overhead errors are?
I bet the number one reason that people have high overhead, in my experience, has less to do with the expenses and more to do with the revenue. They just haven't grown into their overhead yet. So that's typically the primary reason. Secondarily, you may have a practice that, for lack of a better phrase, has petered out to a certain level of revenue that may only support maybe 3 days a week of production, but they feel like they have to keep people employed for at least 4 days a week. Otherwise, they're going to leave and go work somewhere else. So the overhead tends to be high in practices that I get a chance to analyze because of the labor. The other issue that you read about on Dental Town many times when somebody posts about, I want to buy this practice, but they have staff that's been there 10, 15, 20 years, and they're making above the market pay rate because, they're being paid based on the hourly rates back in the 90s and early 2000s, and we went through the recession, wages came down, it at least in the practices that we see. And then all of a sudden you get these sellers that want to sell, but it's you have 35-40% overhead just in labor.
Right. Yeah, I'm there. I still have my first dental assistant. 27 years, and it's hard to tell them every year. It's hard to tell them every year that just because the Earth went around the sun a revolution doesn't mean you get another $1 an hour. I mean, it just doesn't work that way. That's a hard conversation to have. Mm-hmm. It's also a hard conversation when you do performance reviews, because most people think that a performance review, that if you do good, you get another $1 an hour. I mean, well, I did good, so I get more money. And so Tim, so in your 30 years, I mean, you and I have seen some tremendous recessions. We were alive and walking through the big 80 crash when interest rates were inflation, interest rates crazy. Yeah. We saw the 87 Black October Monday or Thursday or whatever it was. We saw the March 2000 crash, but this last one in September 15, 2008. Man, that was a knockout. Where do you think the economy is now with the practice you're seeing? And is dentistry in America growing? Is it flat? Did it ever recover fully from that crash?
Well, if I listen to what I read and what I hear, it sounds like we're heading back into a recession, and the dental industry is leading that recession. But if I go based on my eyes and what I see as we go through our round of mid-year meetings with our clients, or year-end meetings with our clients, by and large, an overwhelmingly majority of our clients are still doing well. Their 2014 numbers are better than 2013. I mean, they're not, knocking the ball out of the park with 30-40% growth, but, I would say the average is probably between 5 to 7%. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that there were some people, a lot of people across the country, a lot of patients that were holding on to their purses through 2009, 10, and 11. They needed treatment, but a spouse was laid off or somebody got cut back on their hours, and they just couldn't afford, or they were nervous about paying for the treatment. But all of a sudden, people are getting back to their jobs. They're adding hours to their schedule, and these issues with their mouths have gotten to a point where the patients are coming to these clients and saying, okay, I know you've been telling me for 3 years I got to get this done. Well, guess what? Now I'm ready.
And in a recession dentistry, when there's a recession in a restaurant and you decide, I'm not going to eat out for lunch today, I'm going to bring a bologna sandwich, that restaurant loses that money forever. But not in dentistry. When you don't get that cavity fixed, it doesn't go away.
Right.
And most of the time it gets bigger and turns into a root canal and a crown. And even if they sit there and it's a toothache and they can't afford the root canal and the crown, they pull it. When times are good, then they come back and want to replace it with an implant and a crown or a bridge or whatever. So dentistry is the hallmark of pent-up demand. And I've been seeing that. When after that 2008 recession, the number of fillings I did plummeted. Mm-hmm. And then 4 years later, the number of root canals I was doing skyrocketed.
Right.
All those $250 cavities in 2008 and 9 and 10 that never were treated, they all turned into $1,000 root canals in the last couple of years. So,
and one of the interesting things that we were seeing during the down economy had to do with our specialists, and I'm going to use an endodontist. And they were actually down because the general dentists were trying to fill their schedules with some more endo because they couldn't fill it with like the crowns and all that other higher level stuff. So the endodontists were suffering. But then when it got busier, last 2 years, 2013, 2014, we've seen the endodontists pick back up, which indicates to me that the general dentists they should also be picking back up with some of the stuff that they were doing, because now they're referring the endo back out again.
So you're saying that endodontists will be doing a lot of retreats in the future?
Right.
From the dentist's attempt at doing the root canal.
That's probably what they're doing now.
So after rent, advertise. What would be the next small thing?
We're
going biggest to smallest. What's after rent?
So we've hit advertising, we've hit labor, lab, supplies, rent. What
was the advertising range?
Advertising is about 2 to 3%.
2 to 3% on average.
Yeah.
Okay.
Once you get beyond that, then the other, 15 to 20 categories, make up the other, 10, 15%.
And what are those categories? Just rip through them off the top of your head.
A through U. You got accounting, you got insurance, you got utilities, you got telephone, you got repairs and maintenance, janitorial, just that whole slew.
Yeah, laundry list
stuff.
Yeah. So now, what percent of your practice is involved with transitions, buying and selling a practice, or
That's a lot of what I do these days.
That's what your online CE course was on.
Exactly right.
And if you haven't seen that, you got to log on and see that. I mean, that's an amazing course. So so tell us, educate us on practice transitions. Are there any rules of thumb for a dentist wondering, what is my practice worth? Is it worth a year's collection, a year's production? Is it a function of net income? Talk us about that.
Profits drive value, in my opinion. That's first and foremost. The lower the overhead, the more profitable any business is. Generally, it's going to drive up the value of that business. That's not to say that there aren't areas of the country where you can still have low profits but still demand a high price for the practice because of the demand. And I like to reference the dot-com bubble of the late 90s, early 2000s, when a lot of these internet companies were losing billions of dollars, but somebody was buying them for billions of dollars because there was a demand.
That was called, didn't they refer to that as a greater fool theory, that didn't matter if your internet stock had any value. When you went to sell it, there was someone that was a bigger fool than you that would buy it?
Right. That's right. So in terms of rules of thumb, I really try to stay away from those. And I'd rather have the practitioner or the dentist look at their profits, and whether they look at what they're taking home and use a multiple of that, or in a multiple doctor group setting basis, look at the net income and take a multiple of that. That to me is probably a better indication, a better guide of a starting point than what you typically read about 60 to 75% of revenue, because that can be so misleading. And unfortunately, you get people that read some of these posts on Dentaltown and they read that a practice should sell for 60 to 75%, and they walk away from an opportunity that's priced at 90%. That can be an excellent deal.
So now, so what is that multiple? And is that an EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, or?
It is, and if we're using that number, it's typically somewhere in the range of a multiple of anywhere from 4 to 7.
4 to 7.
Uh-huh.
So that's same as supply is 4 to 7%.
Right.
Now, I want to talk to you about that. When you say 4 to 7% of supplies, that's almost 100% range, and now you're talking about a 4 to 7% multiple of EBITDA. Will you explain to them what EBITDA is and why that range is so great? What makes it closer to 4 versus closer to 7? Is that urban versus rural? Is that supply demand? What is that?
Well, when somebody asks me what EBITDA is, I tell them just get it out of their mind. It's cash flow. And, then we get into, well, what is cash flow? And I keep it simple. I say, look, if Tim Lott owns this dental practice, I'm not a dentist. I have to go out, hire Howard to produce the dentistry and pay him a reasonable wage. So after the overhead and after I pay you, whatever that cash flow that is left to me, that's what I'm using to determine in terms of a multiple. That's the cash flow that I'm working with. Get EBITDA out of your head. That's
and I pay my associates 25%, and I have all these dentists on Dentaltown saying, God, you're a monster. Why would you pay someone 25%? You should be paying them 50%. And I always tell them, well, no deal is better than a bad deal, and I wasn't born to create jobs, and I paid 25%. What do you see the average associate making?
Between 30-35% of adjusted production or collections.
Between 30 to 35% of adjusted
productions or collections, which should be about the same number.
Right.
or 25 to 30% of gross production.
Okay, so I am a little stingy cheap then.
Well, it depends on the other benefits that you give, doesn't it?
Yeah, and we give health insurance, 401k, uniforms, continue. They're treated pretty handsomely. So what affects why it would be closer to 4 or why it would be closer to 7%?
Basically, the profitability.
Profitability.
So if overhead is lower, then you're probably going to be on the higher end of that multiple, or depending on the area. If you're on the West Coast in California where, they get, 80, 90% of revenues, or maybe in New York City, which, is another little hot area, then you're going to get on the higher end of that range, even if your overhead is too high.
And would you say that's basically because there's a lot of immigrants coming in that are bankrolled cash from foreign money from other countries? I mean,
no. I wouldn't use that as a reason. I think that, you have dental specific lenders that are out there that recognize that dental practices, by and large, generally don't fail. They're successful businesses, and they've recognized that, and they have made it a market to lend 100% of purchase price to these folks that want to buy practices. It gets back to your recent article on OPM, other people's money.
What did you think of that article?
I thought it was right on point. I even posted to it recently. I saw a lot of people, honing in and focusing on just some little examples you gave about the student loan debt, working for $5 an hour and $50 an hour. And it kind of reminded me of the saying, being able to see the forest through the trees. But I deal with this issue a lot with our clients when they want to add another operatory, if they want to add an associate, if they want to expand their space. Do they want to invest that money? Even though the cash flow that they have, it's not like they have 100 or 150 grand in cash. We say, look, borrow it. Go borrow a 5-year term note, borrow $50,000, because if you add that operatory, you just have to produce $1,000 a day out of it for $1,000 a week.
What I understand is they don't understand that using debt or other people's money for your house and cars and vacations is a bad idea.
Right.
But using other people's money so you can go to dental school now instead of having to wait 20 years, or buying a pano machine where you can bill out a dozen panos each month that are over and above the lease payment, or get a CIRAC machine and lower your lab bill today. I mean, so when these guys just get this, I don't want any more debt. I don't want any more debt. And the other thing, they always talk about their $300,000 student loans. They never talk about the fact that their house costs $400,000 and their princess little wife has never had a job. So, you know what I mean? It's like, okay, right. So, why don't you add on the debt sheet the fact that your wife won't have a job for 30 years, and we'll just put that on the balance sheet as a deficit. And then your house, by the time you pay for that off over 30 years, that's about 3 times what you paid for it. And right. So this get out of debt deal is something that if every billionaire had that mentality, none of them would be a billionaire.
Well, and one thing that we try to show our clients when we're dealing with these issues is, again, using the $50,000 example. So you go borrow for 5 years, and if you got to pay back $1,000 a month, 12 grand a year over 5 years to pay that back, that's 60 grand. So that $50,000 investment, though, if it's another room that generates another $150,000 of revenue after your supplies, maybe another assistant, lab, and even after the $12,000 of your debt service, you have even more cash flow to start knocking out some of the other debt that you're concerned about.
And another thing I don't understand is we established earlier that 75 cents of every dollar goes to labor in dentistry. I mean, if half goes to the dentist and a quarter goes to the staff, that's 75 cents of the dollar. And I always see the dentist and the staff always waiting around for a chair. And I look at your equipment overhead, and it's like, why is the dentist back here surfing the internet? And why is everybody standing around? Because we're waiting for one person to dismiss the patient, clean up the room, flip it, and get them seated. And then I go into dental offices that are always have an operatory long. They have an extraoperatory. Then I see two things. I see the receptionist, when it's a toothache or emergency, they can just say, well, just come on down, thinking, well, at least we can get an x-ray and get them on antibiotics or something, catch the fish. Right. And then the dentist walks out of one room and goes right into another fully loaded room. And these dentists say, well, I don't have room for a fourth operatory. And I say, you don't have room for a fourth or fifth or sixth or seventh operatory, but you got time to make payroll on the 1st and 15th every month for the next 30 years.
Right. Well, again, I think many times when we address the issue, once we're able to show them the numbers and get them comfortable that, yes, borrowing more money is actually going to generate more money so you can pay down the debt that you're concerned about. Once they see that and they see what the bottom line can look like, it's interesting how many of them say, all right, I'm going to go to the bank tomorrow and get it done.
And where in your experiences are dental offices an illiquid asset and they're hard to unload? Like right now, I live in an illiquid asset house in my neighborhood. There's 30 houses for sale, and they're all $1 million homes, and no one's selling their home. So I feel my house is illiquid. When is a dental office illiquid?
When
and are you seeing any of this?
I am from time to time, and the practices that are most difficult to sell are the ones where the seller has begun to coast. They were working 4 days a week. They cut back to 3.5, cut back to 3, cut back to 2.5 days. They're only producing $250,000. A lot of those patients now are going somewhere else because they can't get into that office on the days that they want to. Those offices, it's difficult to find a buyer for those offices unless it's in a location where the buyer believes they can grow it back up again.
And Tim, what do you say? We have a lot of dental students on Dental Town. Tons of them, and we can see their registrations because they have their dental school email address. And a lot of their questions are, how do you answer this question? Tim, I'm a senior. Would I make more money if I went into a specialty firm? I mean, do dentists, do endodontists and periodontists and pedodontists, do they make more money than a general dentist? Is that worth it to go to specialty school to make more money? How would you answer that question from the data you're seeing?
I would tell them to read your article about using other people's money, and I'm kind of joking there, but it becomes a question of an investment, and if they believe that they can get a better return on that investment, then it makes sense. And from our client base, the orthodontists, the periodontists, again, depending on where their practices are, depending on their personalities and how they treat the patients, how they treat the referral sources, I think they can make more money than the typical solo practice.
Would you say the average specialist makes more money than the average general dentist?
Yes.
By a factor of what? Like give them some hard numbers. What would you say your average dentist makes, and what would you say your average specialist makes?
I would say the average GP client that we have probably makes between $200 to $250 a year, working 4 days a week. I mean, what kind of career is that? That's just fantastic. I often regret maybe not going to dental school, but anyway, on the specialist side, 400 plus.
300 or 400 plus.
Yep, and I mean we have endodontists that are making 500-600 plus.
Can you arrange those specialties and what would be the more lucrative to the least lucrative?
Well, endo again, I'd say the average is probably 500 to 600 plus. Orthodontists, again, depending on how busy they are, where they're located, they can be a little bit north of that. Oral surgeons, depending on how technical they are with their procedures and stuff, they can even be on the top of the food chain there.
Yeah, but you know what? I can tell you in my in Phoenix, Arizona, my backyard, specialists have the same variance issues as general dentists do, and the fact that, like in my backyard, there's these two Canadian orthodontists. They're both Canadian. They both have larger than life personalities. They're fun, handsome, gregarious. They just have anytime you walk in their office, you just feel loved and it's fun, and they're just crushing it. And then there's other orthodontists in the area that technically are just like, mwah, perfect. and one of them's gone bankrupt and the others are barely surviving. It's the same thing in dental offices I've seen. Like, I'm out here in Phoenix. I mean, I've used to follow around Omar Reed. You remember Omar Reed? And I mean, this larger than life personality, and all the dentists that walk in there, and they walk in the room, the first thing is like, Tim, how are you doing? And they remember your wife and your kids, right? and you're just all jovial, and the first 5 minutes have nothing to do with dentistry, and those guys are just crushing it. Right. And then the little introvert dentist who walks in and looks at the x-ray on the view box and starts talking about dental stuff like that, and their close rate is about 30%, and their treatment plans are small. So it always comes down to these larger than life personalities. I mean, there's a couple of orthodontists here that I'd almost go and get a job as a dental assistant in their office just because it'd be so damn much fun every day. You know what I mean?
Right. I was going to say, I got to tell you a real quick story. Back in '89, when I was dating my wife, I live in Baltimore County. She lived in Howard County. It's about 30, 40 minutes away. But I had a client that was a very successful endodontic practice closer to where I lived. Long story short, was going to spend the night at her house Friday night, and I had a terrible toothache in one of my front teeth. Brings tears to your eyes. You know you need an endo job. So 5:30 Saturday morning, I got no sleep, but I called the doctor's office at 5:30. The endodontist office. He answered the phone because he had it rolled over to his house. I told him what the problem was, what the pain was. Pete said, Tim, if you can meet me at the office at 6:30, I'll meet you there. There was snow on the ground. That's how he treated his patients. That's why he was so successful. He made himself available to treat their pain.
But finish the story. What did you say on that date where she punched you so hard you needed a root canal the next morning? Come on, Tim, finish the story.
I can't share that story. I probably wore that stupid mask and scared the crap out of her.
You know, I the same thing. You know, I've always I give 100% of my patients. I'll even show you my. Can you hand me my card, Brady, please? I even show this. I give 100% of my patients my card. It's got my cell phone number. It's got my email. And you know what? I still can't believe it. All the IOUs I built over there. It's like if I go to the grocery store, I mean, some lady will say, Howard, you remember back in 1987, it was on Thanksgiving and I called you up and my denture, fallout or whatever. And I go down there and meet him. And I made it a big game with my 4 boys because my 4 boys, I'd say, Daddy's got an emergency. And all 4 boys would jump in the Suburban. We'd all drive down there together. One would do the patient napkin. One would suction. And they were all trying so hard. Patients loved it. And I never charged them because I didn't even want to deal with the money or I didn't want to do that stuff like that. And oh my God, talk about customers for life. Some of the most loyal people in the world. I mean, they just say, you're still talking about this event and it's been how many years?
Yeah, it's been, 25 years.
25 years. So that means she's almost 40 now because wasn't that the problem? She was underage.
That's right.
And, hey, well, Tim, that's been our hour. And I just want to, again, how can if some dentist out there is dealing with a CPA who's got equal numbers of dry cleaners and corn farmers and dairy farmers, how can they get involved with your IND CPA, your Institute of Dental CPAs? They just go to the website, indcpa.com?
.org.
Oh, it's .org. I'm sorry.
Yep.
Okay.
.org. And they can also find that link through our website, dentalcpas.com.
That's your website, dentalcpas.com?
dentalcpas.com. And then we have a link to our member firms as well, the IND CPA link.
And what's the process of transferring over from your CPA to yours? Is there a better time to do it, like after the end of the year or tax season, or does it not matter?
It really doesn't matter. Doesn't matter at all, especially in today's world with a lot of practitioners doing their own bookkeeping using QuickBooks or Xero, whatever the software is. It really doesn't matter. Just like when a patient wants to transfer from another office to yours, it doesn't matter what day it is. Doesn't matter what week it is. If they want to come, you open the door, you let them in.
And what accounting software do you like working with the most when it does? Is it Intuit's Quicken, QuickBooks Pro? Is it QuickBooks Online? Is it Peachtree?
QuickBooks Online.
That's your favorite?
Yes.
And And to how big of a company can you do that with? I mean, could Heartland Dental or Aspen or Pacific Dental Service, could they run their big organization on Quicken Online? Is it Quicken Online or QuickBooks Pro Online?
QuickBooks Online, I think, is what it is.
QuickBooks Online.
QuickBooks Online. Can they? They probably can. Should they? Probably not. I think, the bigger companies with multiple locations, multiple departments probably need more sophisticated accounting software.
Okay, I have an MBA from ASU. I use Peachtree. Do you think that's good software?
That's perfectly fine.
Perfectly fine. What would be better than Peachtree?
Oh, I don't know that, better in terms of what. Again, I think it depends on the needs.
Yeah.
Peachtree is fine. It's right up there with Xero and QuickBooks. We don't see a lot of it because Intuit has done such a great job of marketing.
So what was Intuit's better program other than QuickBooks Online? What would be their next level up? Or do they have a higher level of Mercedes?
Well, again, desktop QuickBooks, whether it's QuickBooks Pro or whatever, but I mean, those are the two main ones, either QuickBooks Online or QuickBooks Desktop.
Okay, so I just want to close on this one deal, and all I'm going to say is this. If you're a dentist and you're using a CPA and he's only got 1 or 2 or 3 dentists and spends 95% of his time with non-dentists, I'm telling you, you don't know what you're doing. And I can give you, go look at Tim's 10,000 posts on Dental Town over 10 years. I mean, you have more raving fans on Dental Town than probably anybody on there. Tim, thank you for everything that not only you do for your clients, but for dentistry, but for Dental Town. And thank you for sharing an hour with me.
Hey, Howard, thanks for this opportunity. I was looking forward to it all week, especially with the mask. And I'm glad you got a kick out of it. Thank you.
All right, Tim. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Take care.